NBC News is taken to smearing Julian Assange. I mean, there's no other way I think I can look at it. It seems like they are intentionally misrepresenting what is taking place and is smearing him in the process of misrepresenting what is taking place. Julian Assange filed the lawsuit. The lawsuit had to do with this idea that his asylum is contingent upon him shutting up. They implemented new rules, and in those new rules, Julian Assange was given limited access to the web. But this is after they had essentially bottled him up without allowing him any access to the outside world for like 8 months or 6 months, 6 to 8 months. The new rules, part of the new rule was that he had to take care of his cat. Now, this is purely done to humiliate him. I mean, you're talking about a man who's staying in an embassy for political reasons, and you're talking about him taking his cat and cleaning his room. And you can imagine that people who greatly dislike Julian Assange, of all the things and all the things associated with this lawsuit, that's the one thing that they jumped on. NBC News doesn't report the story that Julian Assange is suing Ecuador because asylum or censorship being a pretext for asylum. No, they didn't report the story like that at all. They reported the story as if Julian Assange was mad at the special protocol because he had to clean his room and take care of his cat. Seriously. Yeah, right here. Look at this. Julian Assange fights asylum terms dictating he has to pay for food and cat care. It's not about the food and the pet care. It's about this idea of his asylum should not be contingent upon him shutting up. He went there for political asylum. And during the time that he was there, he at least had access to the outside world. That access to the outside world was cut off when the new administration came into play, and that new administration was more in line with the dictates of the United States, meaning they were okay with being a colony. Colony is too strong, but you know what I mean. Under the thumb of the United States and Western powers. And part of the stone in his shoe to take the term of the new president was Julian Assange. Julian Assange fights for asylum terms dictating he has to pay for his cat. The new terms say that because of budget cuts, the embassy is no longer able to pay for medical, laundry, or food costs associated with Assange's stay. Again, the point is less to do with his cat and less to do with him taking care of paying for his bills, and has more to do with this idea of asylum being contingent upon censorship. How do you miss that? And do you just miss that on purpose? WikiLeaks found that Julian Assange has filed a lawsuit in Ecuador against new terms of asylum in the Andean country's London embassy that require him to pay for medical bills and phone calls and clean up after his pet cat, his lawyer said Friday. This is just done to humiliate him. That's all this is. This is smearing him. They know goddamn well that the reason that he filed that case was not because they told him to take care of his cat. In fact, the whole reason that they put in the cat thing in and of itself was just to embarrass him. The reality of this is Julian Assange is fighting this new Ecuadorian government because this new Ecuadorian government is trying to shut him up. Not just shut him up, saying that if somebody comes to visit him, that information, meaning the cell phone and all this other stuff, the passwords and all, can be given to the British government, who, of course, will probably give that to the American government. They want to monitor each and everything associated with Julian Assange and beyond monitor, shut him up from the standpoint of political speech. Assange filed the lawsuit saying that is bogus and that is illegal and that you can't do that. And my stay here is not contingent upon censorship. That's illegal. Whether that's true or not, we're going to find out because he's fighting it out in court. My point here is that NBC News gets it magnificently wrong. The majority of people who look at a news site only reads the headlines, meaning this is the story that most people got, not the reality. In fact, I should have had this up, but I was just gonna read that part, but let's read this. Julian Assange, what is his current legal predicament? How could the WikiLeaks founder leave the embassy? And I don't think this is it. All right. This article was tilted against Assange, but at the very least it was more accurate. Julian Assange, WikiLeaks founder, sues Ecuador government for violating his fundamental freedom. Notice this title and this title. What's different? Which one is more accurate? Julian Assange is suing the Ecuador government for violating his fundamental rights and freedom, despite the fact that he's still being sheltered in the country's embassy. The move comes several months after Ecuador cut off communications from Mr. Assange, just days after it emerged it has set new house rules for the WikiLeaks founder, including a ban on making political statements. Mr. Assange fears being extradited, right? WikiLeaks says that the government refused Human Rights Watch visit from counsel, right? Mr. Assange's lawyers said they were also challenging the legality of Ecuador government special protocol, which makes his political asylum contingent upon censoring his freedom of opinion and speech. Julian Assange, WikiLeaks sues Ecuador government for violating his fundamental freedoms. What I'm trying to point out here is that even though, yes, part of that was embarrassing about taking care of his cat and paying for his food, that wasn't the thrust of why he was suing them. NBC News not only gets this wrong, they are out in the fucking boonies, which makes me believe that either they are magnificently incompetent or they're smearing him on purpose. Just pointing this out. Look, Julian Assange is doing God's work. And in doing God's work, he paid for it with his freedom. He's been in that embassy for 6 years, and for the last several months, his communications have been completely cut off. This is the lift that's taken place for pushing out information that the public should know. The public needs to know what goes on behind the scenes. How do you control your government? Excuse me. If you don't know what your government is doing. WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks has served that role of giving out data and information that the public typically doesn't have. You ask why mainstream media doesn't do that. Who knows? WikiLeaks has a much smaller budget and everything else, and yet it's able to put out the information. Julian Assange is paid for it. And in this case, NBC News is just trying to embarrass him. Just saying. They get that story so wrong. And I have to admit, I have to think, like I said, either they're completely incompetent or they're perfectly competent. And they're doing it just to smear him. I don't know which one it is. I'll let you choose. Thanks all. If you enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe. You can always support through Patreon. Thanks all.